Hello and welcome to this video on making a currant bonsai. A currant's a particular form of grape, but they are dried and have an established origin. In short, a currant bonsai is just a grapevine bonsai, but they have some particularly notable traits with regards to the product that grows on it, the fruit. The fruit itself is normally dried, a very dark, almost black type grape when it's fresh, but when it's dried to a black, wrinkled mass, really. They're quite sweet, and they often have a lot of flavour, and this is what makes them special. You may also know them in America by particular names like black currant grapes or Zante currants. The grapes themselves were originally cultivated in the south of Greece, and this is part of their origin, and you find them originating specifically on the island of Zante, hence why the Americans call them Zante currants. The rest of the world uses, well, just currant, which does make things a little bit easier. In terms of what you need to do, grapevines are rather resilient in terms of soil. You can get away with very poor quality substrates. The standard caveat applies to this though. To get the best out of your bonsai grapevine, you want to use a soil mixture that is, well, high quality. This generally means being rich in organic matter, but also very well draining, but also retaining just a bit of moisture. You can, in lieu of that particular set of requirements, just use a good quality potting soil or potting mix. This is often similar, if not the same, as what your nursery stock will be growing in anyway, so this isn't going to be a huge challenge. But you also need to be careful with daily watering, particularly in summer. As the time frame between watering gets longer, the closer to winter you are, you should begin to water minimally in winter, but a lot in summer. The reason you water minimally in winter is the grapevine is dormant and will begin to rot if it becomes waterlogged due to excessive watering. But in summer, it needs lots more watering due to the large leaves, which will dry out quickly due to perspiration. And unfortunately, you can't solve this due to the humid environment. A humid environment, and particularly with grapevines, will inevitably lead to something like mold, and that will harm your bonsai. It is something of a balancing act between keeping the bonsai vine in best health, but not too moist. The other thing to keep in mind is fertilizing. You want to fertilize at the start and end of spring. That's solid fertilizer. You want to use liquid fertilizer roughly every 2 weeks throughout spring, and this is because the vine is going to grow very quickly and a lot of growth. It's not just going to have one main branch that keeps going, it's going to split and form many new branches, and you need to keep these in check with pruning, but you also need to support that growth with fertilizer. If you begin with nursery stock as we have, then you will need to train the vine as much as you can. Now, it's going to be up to you as to how you want to train it. You can choose to do something like trellising, and we've shown that before with grapevines. This is a relatively straightforward process and easy to do. The reason you want to trellis it is that, well, the branches of the grapevine can break very easily. And this means your currants, which you want from this, won't be possible. They won't grow on broken branches. The other option is to create a cascade or semi-cascade, which does require a little more work, and you certainly need to, let's say, be more careful, as you don't want to be breaking the branches or otherwise causing issues where, due to a strong breeze one day, they'll break of their own accord. Once you have them potted and established, you need to wait until late winter to prune large branches back. The small branches can be cut back during the growing season, and arguably should be, but big branches, you need to wait until winter. This is important for two reasons. One, you need to do it to give ramification. The second is for styling. If you cut back branches in spring, big branches at that, you're going to expose the growing wood to pests and pathogens. Doing it in late winter, the burst of growth at the start of spring will cover up those injuries, and you'll get less scarring, or at least have to wait less time for scarring. As mentioned, you need to keep the growth in check though, and this is important for these small branches and ramification. The more you keep them in check, the more ramification you get, the more development of foliage, and eventually you get fruiting currants throughout spring, although it's unlikely to happen for the first year or two. The other option though, particularly something like a cascade, is to use sacrifices branches. These will help with thickening of branches. If you don't prune back and you don't use something like a sacrifice branch, you'll find that they just will not thicken and you won't have anything remotely like a trunk. You will have what is really just a very sickly looking vine. The other thing is that you need to cut the vine back each year. Not only is this to allow for new growth, but the new growth is where you'll find the fruit will grow itself. So without that, you're simply not going to have it happen. And given that the idea with this is to be able to get currants out of it, well, it defeats the purpose if it doesn't produce fruit. As currants are effectively just a form of grapevine bonsai, they need very similar daylight exposure. And this is somewhere between 8 and 10 hours of indirect sunlight each day. Now you can get away with direct sunlight. However, that does raise the issues we mentioned about the problems of moisture and how much moisture you need to give the plants. The secondary to that is that it generates issues around humidity, and then from there you have to worry about mold and other pests and pathogens. If you're not in an environment where you can grow the vine outside, they can be kept indoors, but you also want to keep them about half a meter to a meter. This is somewhere between 2 and 3 feet from windows, particularly in winter. That's because in winter, the cold from the windows will cause the leaves to burn and it will cause damage to leaf buds. Much like any other vine, the wires can be used to shape and style your bonsai, but you want to keep them on for only 6 months, and that is at the extreme end again. Anything more than that, and due to the nature of the growth of the vine, they will begin to cut in, and you will lose any and all growth as the branches just die off. The vine for currants are vulnerable to the same diseases as with grapevines, and these are things that would be familiar to most individuals: aphid, scale, and similar. Those are less of a worry compared to the fungal growth that can occur, the molds and similar, due to humidity. Grapevines are especially vulnerable in that respect, and so you need to be particularly careful, especially if they're kept indoors, that the inside of the house is either not overly humid, or that you're regularly checking for the growth of these fungi. As you can see, growing your own currants can be very simple, as the, bonsai vine will grow very quickly, and it is largely resilient to what you'll do to it. You also, although you don't need to do much to the vine itself, will need to harvest the grapes and then dry them to get what will become currants. And so this is one reason why it's not necessarily a particularly productive way of getting it, but it's one way that if you don't want to grow, say, table grapes or wine grapes, or ornamental grapes for that matter, you can still get something productive out of it, and, well, it may be something interesting and fun. And it's certainly by no means suitable for a beginner, and that's because they can be very temperamental. Forgetting small things like, for instance, leaving wire on for too long, forgetting to water it, and similar can all create problems. Problems in that small mistakes like that lead to big consequences. Big consequences that don't recover from quickly necessarily. Thank you for watching this video. If you found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions you have below.